Hi, welcome to my channel again called Nugget of Wisdom. This is a continuation of the videos I've been doing recently that relate to 2024 and the wars that are going on in the world. And the reason why I'm so keen on talking about these things is obviously that they have huge implications for all of us. I think, obviously, from a point of view of escalation and the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, that is just ongoingly occurring, our brothers and sisters around the world. The implications for us in the countries we live in, the so-called West, the whole sort of moral agenda that's being torn to pieces. That this world we've lived in, where we've been, I would say, indoctrinated with propaganda about other countries, about democracy, about what our sort of Western, US, European values are post-World War, about doing the right thing. The movies, the films, the media is all about lies very heavily on morals. And what you're seeing is, with the advent of new media and the ability for people to get information a lot easier, you're seeing a teardown, a complete teardown of the curtain. And inside that curtain, you see the guys who are pulling the levers are basically, a lot of them have none. They have no empathy, no morals, and they're focused basically on their outcomes that are related to power and control. And this stuff's been going on for generations. This is not new. This has been going on. It's just that we haven't seen it. Just like the Wizard of Oz, we haven't seen these things because there's been an illusion that there's some great power, but the great power, some great knowledge, some great wisdom, some great father taking care of us, or mother figure. But in fact, it's a charade, and it's just a little old guy behind a curtain pulling levers. And then, just like, as I say, in the Wizard of Oz, you have these characters who feel like they don't have courage, or they don't have the confidence in themselves to realize how amazing and beautiful and wonderful they are, but they find that. And part of finding that confidence is realizing that there's these people behind the curtain, this guy behind the curtain, and it's all a charade. And I think we are going through this at the moment. The world is going through this change where it's becoming very obvious that we all are going through this transformation. Every single adult is going through this transformation where it's difficult. It's like a collective ego disillusion, where what we thought was the way things are turns out not to be the way things are. And I could go into great detail, but we all know the stuff that's going on. Mass murder, genocide, torture, glorification of despicable acts, inhumane acts, very little or any respect for human beings, acts of terrorism. And these are all happening, or at least being condoned or being facilitated by people we thought were on the other side. And of course, I haven't thought this for a long time. I was in politics for 8 years, and that was an eye-opener for me. Because when I went into politics, I very quickly learned that it was nothing like I had even imagined on the outside. And I really struggled, to be honest. Mentally, I struggled when I left it because, first of all, it's impossible to tell people because they just wouldn't believe you. They would not believe the kinds of things that went on, even in local politics, and the behaviour of people and the motives and the system, this political system I call the shamocracy. And, it would just turn everybody off because they just go, I can't believe this. It's I don't want to hear about this. But unfortunately for people, or fortunately, I think it's becoming impossible to hide from these things because more and more and more it's all coming out into the public domain. And so I wanted to talk about the question, very simple question, about war. We're very focused at the moment on war. And that song, War, What Is It Good For? And it's a really good question. What really is war good for? Why should we have war? The first thing I'd say to you is that I believe, and it's just my perspective, so don't believe me, but it's something worth listening to if you want to get one perspective of many. War is another complete, utter brainwashing process. The whole idea of war is absolutely and utterly insane. It's insane. And the problem we have is that since I was in nappies, I have been hoodwinked into believing war is some sort of normal part of society. Whenever I turn on the TV, there's a war movie. There's, violence. I mean, pretty much almost all the television I watched as a child was violence in this highly religious country at the time, Ireland. But it was American violence. It was violence from the US, from Hollywood, from the movie makers, and weekly episodes of violence. Right? And so, but then also games. When we started getting into computer games, they were just violence. Murder, killing, shooting. And then, of course, even the music. The music is full of, especially rap music. There's all sorts of violence in music. Violence or tragedy and loss. And all these things, I think, have had a really, really, really big influence in our psyche, our collective consciousness. Because when I listen to what's going on today with the good people discussing war, they're kind of using someone else's language. They're using the language that somebody else has sort of injected into them like a virus. So they talk about the theatre of war. They talk about war like it's a game and a strategy and, tit for tat, sort of they've done this, now the other guys have to return. In order to look good with their people, their strategy needs to do this. And in reality, it's all just complete nonsense and brainwashing. Complete brainwashing. First of all, is it a game? I would say it's definitely not a game. Because I learned about games when I was a child. And games were these things you could play which weren't real, but were like they were real. So football was a game. Nobody got killed. You had a referee. And you had a crowd watch the game. And in the end, you had so many rules and regulations. And the ball goes through the posts on one side. That means, yes, you've scored. And whoever gets the most of those wins, with a lot of rules about how players can move around the pitch and how many you can have. If one player does something wrong, then he gets a yellow card. If he does another, he gets a red card. Well, how could war be any kind of game? How could we even refer to it as a game? If it was like football, first of all, you'd have your players on each side and half of them would be killed in horrible, gruesome ways with everybody watching on from the sidelines. So at the end, one team would have 4 players left and the other team might have 3. Who's won there? Because this is the other problem. We think there's winners. We think there's winners in war. There's no winners. Everyone's a loser. And as the world gets more technological and more sophisticated, it becomes so patently obvious that the whole world potentially loses. It's like going to a football match. And everyone in a football match potentially gets killed, plus all of the spectators. Because that's where nuclear war comes in. And then you say, okay, well, so it's a game. Well, what about the referee? What about the rules? It's like having a referee who just changes the rules. Or makes up the rules. Or pretends that the rules are one way, but they're not in that way. Or cheats. You couldn't have a game of football that was structured in a way that current global wars are structured. In fact, what's really interesting, I talked about the silent majority. Well, all the spectators would just could be up in arms. The game would they basically race onto the pitch. They would go nuts. They'd tear their tickets up and walk off. So even if you think it's a game, if you pretend that it's a game, it doesn't follow any rules of any game. But also, it is really interesting that I noticed that there's an obsession with PR around war, public relations. And, it's pretty obvious. One side is happy to tell tons of lies about what they've done, how they haven't been attacked, how they've not attacked civilians, how they care about all of the humane and, acts of goodness and making sure people who've got hurt are going to get medical care. And we can see, in many cases, it's a pack of lies. They don't care at all. If they were honest, they would say, we don't care about human life at all. We're not interested. Because for them, this game is about power and control, resources, land, oil, gas, trade routes, and maintaining power. And it's the craziest game ever, because in the modern world, the best way to secure and prosper, be secure and be prosperous, is for the world to get to a place where there are rules. There is humanity. There is respect for other people. And we have kind of a multipolar situation where all the countries can trade with each other. And, if you want a game, then have the game of trade. They who innovate and are smarter when it comes to business and make things more efficiently and better quality and better performance are the winners. That's a game you can have. But the other interesting thing about the PR, public relations, is that, I don't know whether you've noticed, whenever civilians are killed, there's a huge, quick, children, mothers with their babies are killed. In reality, my honest opinion is there's so much hypocrisy around this that the major players in this game, this fakery game, don't give a stuff about the mothers and babies. They're only using the mothers and babies to try and get to the silent majority and make us as empaths go, oh my gosh, it's terrible, get angry and go against the other side. Because if you look at the numbers of people being killed, for example, a very simple assessment, if you look at the numbers of children that have been killed, civilians that have been reportedly killed in the Ukraine-Russia war, and it's tens of thousands. I think it's about, I'm not sure of the exact figures, but it's in the tens of thousands. And then you look at the figures for Gaza and the deaths in Gaza, and it's tens of thousands. And I would say it's most likely, if you look at the best figures from the UN, it's far, far higher than the reported figures of civilians killed in Ukraine. So it doesn't matter, from my example, it doesn't matter whether the Gaza number is higher slightly or much higher than the deaths in Ukraine, because in reality they're two very, very different kinds of wars, in the sense that it's a much smaller conflict in Israel, and it was about a terrorist group attacking their country and the Israelis going in and stopping these people and rooting them all out, whereas in Ukraine it's a full-on war. Yet what you see is the American democracy, the British democracy, supported by the European democracies, propagandizing Russia as some sort of genocidal, evil, cruel regime. And if that is the case, they cannot judge it. Because those countries, those European countries, the UK and the UK, are complicit, as much complicit in horrendous murder and genocide in Gaza. And the conventional media, it loves the little example, the one example of the mom and the baby, in the hospital. But for us, the silent majority, it's all just trickery to try and stir our emotions to get us to side with them. And from our point of view, it's siding with the people who have humanity. But in reality, that's being unshrouded. And my heart goes out, and I passionately feel so sad, tortured for the things that are happening to people in those places. But now I distance myself from the propaganda from the media. Because I don't mind people who moralize about, empathy and about humanity, if they do it themselves. If they are embodying that themselves. But I feel deeply insulted and tricked by people who are moralizing but being totally immoral. The other thing that I find really odd, apart from the fact that war is no game and no one wins, and then people say, oh, but the brave win. Get out there and fight back. Okay, so you fight back. So kill or be killed. So what you have is an escalation process. This side does something terrible to you, so you do something terrible back. Now they do something terrible more to you. Now you do something terrible to them. And eventually you get to a point where you've got the most sophisticated weapons ever made by man, and you can destroy everyone and everything. There's no way out. The only way out is to ruthlessly destroy your enemy completely. Wipe them off the face of the earth. And we see that with what's going on today, in the wars today, and the horrendous destruction of the places where people live. But the other thing I find very disturbing is how the soldiers in these wars are almost like bottom of the pile. They're almost like, children, girls, babies, girls, boys, mothers, fathers, grandparents, soldiers. And like soldiers are just disposable. And you notice there's very, very little talk about how many have died and where they've died. It's almost like they don't want to say, because if you give away that you're having huge losses, then it makes you look bad. So in this game, you look better if it looks like you haven't lost so many people, soldiers. And then there's this kind of narrative, well, they joined up, they signed up for it. The reality is that those soldiers, most of the time, are probably young men and some young women, but a lot of young men in their 20s, and even younger now, who are often conscripted. They're told, you have to join and that's it. Who get injured, traumatized, killed in the most horrendous ways. We don't see, by the way, in our game, we don't look at the horrible bits, because that's too upsetting for us. As voyeurs watching, looking on, it's too upsetting to see the grisly bits, so we don't see those. But I cannot imagine how awfully terrifying it must be. First of all, in these wars where there isn't really a proper cause. A cause where you're saying, I need to protect and free the people of this land. On our side, in the UK and in the US, it's proxy wars, where we're using other people, other countries to fight the wars. I mean, it's so cowardly as well to weasel your way into another country, create loads of conflict, and then get them to fight each other. And for us to sit on the sidelines and watch. And then when we see that the majority of people who die are the soldiers, and the technologies, drones that fly around and basically, drop bombs on people. Can you imagine how terrifying it must be, where nowhere is safe? Either a drone is going to come up around you, blow you up, or some mega bomb. And of course, on top of that, you've got just a constant supply of weapons. I'm pretty sure that the people who are behind all these wars, which I believe are a very small number, I'm pretty sure if you could find out who they were and you dropped them into the war zone, well, first of all, they'd fight you. They would definitely not want to do that. But in a way, if I was in a position to do it, I think it would be best thing for them. Because the people who are really behind all these conflicts, and they're nonsense conflicts, they're conflicts that are based around the most ridiculous things. NATO. Is it really worth the loss of hundreds of thousands of people and destruction of countries over an organization that you could be a member of that's supposed to be a peacemaking organization to make the world safer? When instead it's a proxy, as we all know, and a money-making machine, because it helps to feed a whole arms industry. Or another group who say, no, this little piece of land. God looked down onto the multiverse. He picked out this universe, and then he looked again, and he saw through the billions of galaxies, a galaxy called the Milky Way, and he zoomed in again, and he saw millions of planets, and then he saw this tiny, tiny, tiny speck called Earth, and he looked down again, and he found this tiny piece of land, and he said, that belongs to my people. That land is theirs, so no one else's. And the people who live on it can get lost. I gave it to them. Really? And we watch this complete and utter nonsense. And what's even more astonishing is that we kind of agree that it's impossible to solve. That somehow it can't be solved. It's been going on for generations. It's so difficult. Because again, we all think the way we were taught within a complete rubbish, BS idea of war as a game. And we think that according to some rules, it's impossible to solve. But when you get out of that game, when you walk away from that game, when you don't play by the rules because the rules are trickery, then it's easy to solve. And the astonishing thing is that the stakes are high, because solving it can actually save us from an escalation to something really horrendous. And basically, people will just laugh and say, what's he talking about? How? It's not, this is really difficult to solve. No, it's easy to solve. And what's even more interesting is that I remember when I was a kid and growing up, when wars are over and they're finished, what happens then is they start praising the soldiers and doing movies about them. And the soldiers suddenly get elevated to a higher status. Their deaths now are more important than they were. Because again, it's all propaganda. And also, what's really interesting is if the proxy loses hundreds of thousands, millions of its people, but the controller who controls the proxy loses 5 people, then you'll have great pomp and ceremony with them being specially flown in, with the Prime Minister, the President standing out looking at the coffin draped in the flag of the country. Our boys, our heroes. So war, what is it good for? It's worth good. Sorry, war, what is it good for? The answer is simple. It's good for nothing. We've been had. And in our current world, it's disastrous, because the other really interesting thing here is that the triggers that will move us to a war of the annihilation of millions of people, some sort of nuclear war, those triggers are not necessarily some evil emperor, some evil president or prime minister or king pressing a button and saying, I'm starting a nuclear war. That's not how it happens. The most likely outcome is that we have escalations. And within our complete BS war ideology, these rules force people into positions where they end up using more and more and more powerful weapons. So they'll use more and more powerful missiles. So they'll use more and more powerful bombs, non-nuclear bombs. So then they start using thermonuclear bombs, small thermonuclear bombs. And then it escalates into release of the proper stuff that can kill, wipe out millions and millions of people. And I always think that if I was one of the remaining handful of people left on the earth, and I'm standing on a hill and I'm looking at all of the destruction, and an alien comes down in a spacecraft and lands, gets out and says, what happened here? Can you tell us what happened to your planet? What would I tell him or her? How would I tell them? How would I tell them what we did? How insane, crazy, mad we were. How we had no wisdom. How we were living on our crazy traumas and our egos and our false narratives and our BS stories. And how we sort of tripped up until we basically tripped ourselves into destroying the whole beautiful system we live in. And then that alien asking, well, what was it like? What was this place like before it was destroyed? What do you do? What do you say? It was amazing. It was an incredible place. It was full of beauty and variety. And when he asked me, what about these beings? They must have been terrible. No, they were amazing beings. Humans were amazing creatures. And most of the most amazing creatures didn't want any of this. They wanted peace. But they were so basically hoodwinked and brainwashed that they were just inactive most of the time, or they didn't want to know, or they didn't believe what was going on. And they just let it all unfold. It was too late when they woke up. How would you, I wouldn't want a conversation with that alien. I would just want to hide somewhere. I think I'd want to hide under a rock and cry, basically, and think, what am I going to do now? The saving grace from the whole thing would be that if there was just a small number of us left, we could start again. But would we do the same thing? Well, if you look at history, we've been exactly doing that. We've been doing the same thing over and over and over and over. And we've had so many warnings, so many. We've had so much suffering from making these mistakes. It's a bit like a child putting its hand in a hot stove and you telling that child, if you put your hand in a hot stove, you're going to get burnt. And that child doesn't believe you. It gets burnt. And you just put some cream on it and stick it in some cold water with some ice. And then you think, okay, so he's not going to do this again, is he? But he doesn't. Next time he sticks it on again, but this time he leaves it on for longer. Now he has to go to hospital, have bandages. And this goes on and on and on and on. So, war is nuts. War is crazy. There's no bravery. There's no bravery standing on the sidelines behind the curtain orchestrating proxy wars. There's no bravery in that. The only bravery is in the ordinary people who get conscripted or get killed, traumatized. And the emergency services, the people who go out and try to save lives, from pull people from the rubble. That's where the bravery is. There is bravery where people shout no, and they are active and they get out into the street and they hold the placards for peace. There's bravery in just sharing your view. There's bravery in trying to do something that you can easily do now, to spread wisdom, to try and get us all to understand and see how crazy and how nuts this all is. And also to see how easy it is for us beautiful beings of love, how easy it is for us to collectively stop it all. Tomorrow, tonight, for it all to stop in 10 minutes from now. Stopped. And we all know how you do that. It's really simple with these wars at the moment. It's the US democracy. They make a phone call. President Kennedy. Just look at the history. President Kennedy. Him and Khrushchev had direct talks. There's great examples in history where very, very wise people have been able to just break out of the junk, stupid rules. And they're brave because they risk their lives, seriously risk their lives, because they're going against the shamocrats. They're going against the people who want to control everything. The last thing I wanted to say is that revenge, war and revenge. The revenge thing's another waste of time. The revenge is stoking another fire. And we have to find a way to get out of the revenge mode. And, really good example here is, okay, so you torture them like they tortured you. So you kill them because they killed your family. So you kill their children because they killed you kill their children because they killed your children. You become them. Is it understandable? The nature of anger and rage? Yes. It's understandable, but it's unfortunately another sort of madness. And you'll see that in this game that's played with wars. Revenge is part of the game. We must show them. We must do something in return, in retaliation. And sadly, that revenge always comes down on the innocents. Two evil emperors, One evil emperor kills the other emperor's family. Innocent children. The waiters, the cleaners, his driver, the farmer, all the people that serve him and are forced to serve him are all killed. So that evil emperor responds by doing the same to a whole pile of innocent people on the other side. And then it all just breeds hatred, more hatred. So I hope listening to this, you can get the sense that war is completely and utterly insane. And the people who are perpetrating wars and proxy wars, who are a minority, what they really need is to go and have counselling. They desperately need to have counselling. We need to identify them, respectfully take them out of the system so they can't do any more damage, and send them off to a retreat with spiritual teachers, psychiatrists and counsellors to try and snap them out of their madness. But we should not tolerate, as the silent majority, we should not tolerate having crazy people dictating whether there's a future for this world, whether there's a tomorrow. Leaving it in the hands of people who are off their trolleys, basically. And that's where we are now. Anyway, thank you for listening. It was really fun to express a little bit of my energy around all of this. And I hope it's been useful and helpful. See you in my next video.